Good morning. I'm here. You're listening to Tea and Toast with me, Stuart, and I'm joined by Neil from Pooh Corner. Hello.
Hi there, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I think I'm doing really well. This looks this looks like we're gonna have some fun.
Yeah. So you're from Pooh Corner. What's your role?
So I own a very, very strange and wonderful place on the edge of the Ashdown Forest, which is famous for the Winnie the Pooh books.
Yeah.
And A.A. Milne, after the First World War, moved down here and watched his children, his child, and he didn't have children, he had a child, Christopher Robin. He literally watched his child and how he played with his teddy bears and then realised how he interacted with the landscape.
Yeah.
And essentially, here we are nearly 100 years on, where our job on the edge of the forest is to help educate and help give people a guide to understand how Milne used the natural environment to create these most wonderful stories that we now know as the original books and then through the animations that Disney have created.
I remember recent years, someone actually bought the bridge, didn't they?
Yes.
And something happened with it. What happened with the bridge?
Well, essentially, it wasn't the bridge that's there now. So the way we always describe it, and I have been told off by the owner of the old bridge, although he's a wonderful human being and we get on really well. The scenario is the only bridge that really matters is the bridge that is at this point where Pooh Bridge has always been.
Yeah.
In the 1990s, the original bridge was built in about 1907, 1903, around there. I might be a little bit wrong. Apologies, everyone. You see, that's the first trick question, isn't it? Thanks for that. So a long time ago, they built a bridge which was really just a small bridge designed for cattle.
Yeah.
And it was that bridge that was kind of changed, adapted. They made it a bit bigger so they could get horses over it and other bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And that bridge around the 1920s was where A.A. Milne and Christopher Robin would have to walk across to go up to the forest.
Yeah.
And it was at that spot where one day they just threw a pine cone in and then watched it appear the other side, and that sparked the imagination.
Of Pooh sticks.
Exactly. So Pooh sticks really came out of this idea of being a pine cone that floated. And I'd go as far to say that we don't know really whether A.A. Milne and Christopher really played the game.
Yeah.
But what we do know is the way that he wrote about it turned it into such a magical thing that we now get, the Ashdown Forest gets over 1 million visitors a year, and we get around, I would say, 75,000 of those visitors come in and have lunch with us over the year, and we just get the people that want to take it a stage further, that want to learn about the history of Winnie the Pooh, and buy a teddy bear, all those kind of things. So our job is to look after that aspect of it. But it is very much a case of, that Pooh Sticks Bridge is famous worldwide. We get Japanese, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealanders. We're getting a ton of people at the moment from sort of Singapore and places that you wouldn't normally expect. But it's got a huge following, really has. And it's wonderful. Really is. It's a beautiful thing.
So that was some more music. I hope you're enjoying that today. I'm still here with Neil. Hello.
Hi there.
And I was wondering about the filmography and animation side of Winnie the Pooh. So he was turned into the first Disney animation, wasn't he?
The one thing that you always find is that E.H. Shepard drew these wonderful pictures that, once they were in the books, there was this sort of beautiful narrative by A. Milne, and then it was put into these beautiful illustrations by Shepard. And the two of them created something that, if you go back to the 1920s when they're released, you're talking about something that happened just after the First World War. We were still in huge economic crisis, and living wasn't fun. It was a very, very difficult time, and something that we'll hopefully never understand in many ways. But it was dark, and A. Milne had served in the First World War, and E.H. Shepard had served in the First World War. And it really was one of those things where Milne used the books in a way of dealing with his own PTSD. And that's before there was any way of them understanding PTSD. We didn't really have a name for it then.
No.
But it was really based on him almost using the creatures as Winnie the Pooh, and I call them creatures. They're not. They're big, fluffy, lovely, cuddly things. But he used the characters and his son as a conduit to really understand how people should solve conflicts and things, and that's really what he was doing.
And many people say that the Winnie the Pooh characters are like personality traits as well.
They are. That's one of the things that we look at it as a modern perspective. Allegedly, I would go as far to say that they were also men that he knew, or people that he knew, not necessarily men. But a good example of it is if you look at, say, I'm going to use as an example Piglet. Piglet was actually a soldier who he knew that was afraid to share his rations.
Yeah.
And that comes back down to the piglet in the haycorn and stuff like that. One of the interesting things is we have a wonderful lady who lives in the village. She's 93 years old, and she actually remembers growing up around the family. And she talked about the fact that Milne said to her one day that nobody ever asked him about the heffalump.
Okay.
And she was interested by that, even as a young child, because she knew the books. She knew who Mr. Milne was. You never called him Alan, it was always Mr. Milne. And he explained to her that the heffalump was, if you imagine it, and this is the best way to describe it, the heffalump was a thing that you were afraid of, that you didn't see, that you then decided to set a trap for.
Yeah.
But then when you caught it, you realised you actually quite liked it and became friends. And that was Milne's response to how he learned to deal with the German soldier.
Yeah.
Because it was, whenever he sat down and had a cigarette with one, he didn't hate them.
Yeah.
You know, they may have been pointing guns to each other in the masses, but on a one-to-one basis, that's kind of how the logic kind of came about.
Yeah.
From the information that we know today. But it wasn't one of the things that Milne never talked about or alluded to, but it was definitely something that if you look at it and you start to analyse it and understand it, it starts to make some sense, and you can kind of appreciate as an adult where he was coming from.
So would you say the events that are in Goodbye Christopher Robin like 100% accurate?
Goodbye Christopher Robin is a fabulous film.
Yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful, and if people haven't seen it and they really want to learn about what life was like for this young boy, then it's a must watch because it's so well done. There's a couple of things that are quite fascinating by that, and these are the only two inaccuracies that I know of.
Yeah.
The scenario is that Christopher Robin, the movie is called Goodbye Christopher Robin, yet it doesn't quite tie in with the film. The reason being is in real life, Christopher Robin was actually hit by shrapnel, and they actually thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
But he survived. That was probably a bit too much for the Hollywood film, so they just had him missing in action.
Okay.
The only other thing that's slightly off from it is that when they got the memo, which was typed out saying that he was missing in action, the way it would have worked in the First World War was that the local postmaster would have been sadly the first person to learn of somebody's demise or death or injury or anything like that. In a town centre like a London or a Manchester, city like a London or Manchester, they would have been typed out.
Yeah.
But actually the way it worked in a local rural environment, they would have been handwritten.
Okay.
So essentially they're the only, and they're not big issues.
No,
so I have to say, as far as somebody that's now studied and worked to understand who these people were and fallen in love with them, you know, and wonders, you know, what they would think of what we do here now with the museum and the other things we do. I believe that actually the reality of it is that they did their really, really best. And Anne Thwaite, who wrote it, is an amazing human being who really has spent her life working on understanding Milne more than anyone ever could. She's just done it so well. And her efforts in writing Milne's biography and then doing the screenplay for that, top master, because she's amazing. So,
when Disney acquired like TV and film rights, were A.A. Milne and E.H. Shepard still alive?
Well, no, A.A. Milne never really wanted Disney to have it.
Yeah.
So, strange enough, Milne was kind of dead against the idea. And I don't know what Shepard's views were. I'm not going to suggest I do. Milne had passed away. But actually, Walt Disney, the reason he wanted them, and it's actually quite nice, I think it's a special story. There's people in the world that can sometimes come in here and be very much, we love E.H. Shepard, we don't like Disney. What we always try to explain is that put yourself in Walt Disney's head. You've got a man who spends his whole life wanting to be creative And what he finds is that his daughters are in their bedrooms giggling away reading Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
So he realizes that these must be really great stories if his daughter is choosing Winnie the Pooh over his own creations. And that for him was something that he then started to explore. And that was 20 years before he eventually got his hands on it. So he was chasing it from about the 1940s.
Yeah.
Once Milne had passed away, Daphne Milne had the ability to make some decisions.
Yeah.
And Daphne then agreed to sell it to, or the certain rights to Disney. Now, it is believed, again, I always use the phrase allegedly because there's no absolute evidence to certain things, but we've spoke to Disney, we've spoke to people that animate for Disney, and people that are working on the new series now. And the amazing thing about it is they actually did start to draw an animation like E.H. Shepard because they wanted to see if they could. Yeah. But it just wasn't possible at the time because Winnie the Pooh was only ever going to be a short 25-minute sequence. It was about doing these small bits. And the same production team that Walt Disney asked them to crack on with it, they were busy doing Jungle Book. Yeah. They didn't want to do Winnie the Pooh. It was actually getting in the way. It was a real problem for them. So they were a little bit disgruntled. But Walt said, no, we need to do this as well. So strangely enough, there's lots of little links between the first set of Winnie the Pooh's animations and Jungle Book. Like the young boy that plays Mowgli is also Christopher Robin. Okay. And little bits like that, the voices are the same, and in later bits they used sequences from Jungle Book in the things. But they actually used an awful lot of bits to save money on Winnie the Pooh. The odd thing is Winnie the Pooh was then part of a larger film. It was just a 25-minute featurette before a larger film. Nobody remembers the larger film at all, but Winnie the Pooh is now the second largest thing for Disney as far as revenue. And the truth is Walt Disney wasn't very well. They had to say to Walt, unless we find a way to animate this differently, you'll never see it in the public domain. So he kind of basically said to them, well, it's about the stories, so let's make sure that we get the story across. That's more important than how they look. And to be fair, I think if you look at what they achieved, it's beautiful. Yeah. I'll never say anything bad about it because I think both the E.H. Shepard, Winnie the Pooh, and what Disney have done, they both have just ensured that it's here for future generations. Yeah, and that's the most important thing.
It's like 97 or 96. How long is it after?
Oh, what's the currently
1926 was the
so next year we celebrate the first anniversary of when we were very young. Yeah. So that was 1924. Yeah. Then you've got Winnie the Pooh that's 1926. So 2026 will be Winnie the Pooh. Then you've got Now We Are Six, which is 27. Yeah. So 2027, and then of course House at Pooh Corner. The final piece is 1928. So 2028 will be what is essentially the end of a long celebration of Milne's work for Winnie the Pooh. Yeah. But I don't think it's worth ignoring all the amazing things he also did to help things like Wind in the Willows and all sorts of other... Yeah. There's a very, very famous thing from the 70s, some people might remember, called Baa, which actually was a book that Christopher Robin was given by somebody. Milne fell in love with it, and Milne realised that this person was struggling to get it published. Milne wrote the foreword to it and then got it round to publishers, and Milne helped other writers.
That's really nice. And tell me a bit about Pooh Corner itself.
So Pooh Corner was essentially, it was a house that was built in 1703. Yeah. As two farmers' cottages. But by the sort of mid-1800s, it was moved into more of a commercial establishment. So it was one of the UK's first Hovis bakeries. Okay. And also on the side of it, there was like a tobacconist and a sweet shop, which is part of the story. So an amazing guy called Mike Ridley is really the man that started Pooh Corner. If you go back to the 1920s, it was something that Christopher Robin wrote about in his memoirs, and he talked about going up the hill and down the hill and into the first house on the left, and that's where he bought his sweets. And he loved these little black and white sweets called bullseyes that we really kind of know today probably as humbugs or something like that. But those were his sweets. And he actually did have a donkey that he used to ride into the village. And everybody assumes that the donkey was called Eeyore, but it wasn't. The donkey was called Jessica. Eeyore was the noise that Jessica made. Yeah. And it was one of those things where Mike, many years later, acquired this house. The barn behind it he turned into his pottery barn, where he had a licensing deal with Disney to create Winnie the Pooh pottery.
Yeah.
And that was sold in Marks and Spencer's and all sorts of other wonderful places. And then he realised what he should do is open it up as a tea room as well, and he could also sell his Winnie the Pooh pottery in the tea room, and that way he had another outlet and another way to make money. And he then promoted it, and he then turned it into a toy shop, and so he had for many years until about 2011. So for 30, 40 odd years, he ran it as his business, and he worked really hard at it. He was so passionate about it, and we found some old video clips about it, and it's lovely. Even though I never got to meet the man, it's lovely to know that there's a few little bits of video clips where you can see it and get the sense of it, of what he was trying to achieve. It then was in the hands of another family for a couple of years, and then we acquired it in 2019, just after the release of Goodbye Christopher Robin and Disney's Christopher Robin. And since then we've added a museum, and that really has changed the business completely, because what it's allowed us to do is really add education to the stories of A. Milne and Christopher Robin and E.H. Shepard, and the other bit part players around it. You know, there's so many people that played a part in its success. You know, there's the original teddy bears that were owned by Christopher Robin are now in the New York Library, and that's down to a chap called Stephen Schleusninger, who was the New York publicist. So the original bears that were Christopher Robin's teddy bears are now in the New York Library, and the reason they're there is because of part of the New York publicity team. One of the people said, if we could use the original bears, we'll do a US tour and we'll make you an awful lot of money. So Milne went upstairs, threw the teddy bears in a box, and probably said, "Send me the cash," and off they went. You know, neither Milne nor Christopher Robin were ever that emotionally attached to it, if that makes sense. Whereas the rest of the world has fallen in love with it in a way that maybe because they were so central to it, you have a different passion for it. So it is one of those things where I know I've bounced around from Hartfield to New York and back again, but essentially it is one of those things where this is such an international brand, and our job here now, having taken it over in 2019 and adding a museum and developing the business further, is really about making sure we can add some value to all the people that travel to the Ashdown Forest every year. Because without the Ashdown Forest and the way that it is and how it works and how Shepard was able to create it visually, people wouldn't know of Hartfield, and they wouldn't know of the Ashdown Forest, and they wouldn't know of the 100-acre wood that is actually known as the 500-acre wood. And coming back to an earlier point you made about the original bridge, the man that owned, or his family, through generations have owned the 500-acre wood, they're the family that bought the original bridge, because they have history of their great-grandfather playing with Christopher Robin on the bridge. So it became a very personal thing when they were able to get the old bridge. But the bridge that's been there has now been there for 40 odd years. So for most people, that bridge that you can go to any time of day free of charge and play Pooh Sticks, the beauty of it is that bridge is Pooh Sticks. And when they put the next one in, that will become Pooh Sticks, because it's about the location and the place on the forest that it's so famous for.
So what's your favourite thing that's on public display in the museum, or the Poohseums? I saw it online.
So the Poohseum I think it's a very strange thing for me, because each piece has a real journey for me. It's sent me all around the world to find bits or to source things, just talking to people from all around the world that have things. I think the thing that has been, for example, what we have there, we've actually got a set of first editions of all the 4 books, all signed by A. Milne. Now that in itself is just incredibly rare, and they're in such good condition, it's amazing. We've also got some original drawings that E.H. Shepard did. We've also got an original teddy bear that is like Christopher Robin's. And it's things like that where I couldn't choose a favourite, because actually they've all got a wonderful story that we then get to tell other people. And I would say my favourite story, I think, is when you talk to people about Winnie the Pooh, they don't realise just how it was really born of the First World War. Had we not had the First World War, there would be no Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And it starts well before Christopher Robin had a teddy bear. You know, we take people as far back to 1890. And in 1890, in East London, A.A. Milne was being taught at a school run by his own father.
Okay.
And his father actually employed a English and science teacher who got the job because he showed A.A. Milne's father that he could teach it cheaply.
Yeah.
And that man we now know today as H.G. Wells.
Oh, okay.
So H.G. Wells, who went on to write War of the Worlds, The Invisible Man, taught A.A. Milne, and actually played a part in his life many times, where A.A. Milne had written 5 poems about this couple living in London, and he showed them to H.G. Wells, and H.G. Wells said, "It's too good for poems, turn it into a book." And that became A.A. Milne's first book. Yeah. So without people helping Milne, we wouldn't have Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
And also without Milne helping others, there's many other things we wouldn't talk about today.
I'm going to ask you next, how did A.A. Milne know E.H. Shepard? Did they know each other?
Well, they actually met working at a satirical magazine at the time called Punch Magazine.
Okay.
One of the things we have here in the museum is actually the 2 original portraits that were hanging up of them on the walls of Punch's HQ. And it shows you just how they looked after the First World War. So they're probably the earliest photographs of them just after the war. They're quite special from that point of view. But they worked together, they knew each other. Milne and Shepard basically had done quite a bit of work together on Punch. They knew each other. They weren't great friends. It's not like they were best buds, but they knew they could work together. When it came to Winnie the Pooh, Milne wasn't sure he was the right person for it.
Okay.
And Milne was quite adamant that he wanted to trial a few other people, but he was put under huge pressure from others that felt different to give Shepard a try. And actually, lo and behold, the first time that Shepard started to put it together, and the odd thing about it is that Shepard didn't have a lot of time with Christopher Robin and Milne.
Yeah.
So the bear that is in the books is actually a drawing that he did of his own child's bear, which is fine. It doesn't matter, but it's quite interesting that actually this is where there's a lot of little offshoots of things that aren't quite what you think they are in relation to it all. So it's one of those things where, you know, Shepard he jumped on his motorbike because he lived in sort of towards Guildford Way. He would jump on his motorbike, he would end up here, and he'd just wander up on the forest with Milne, and they'd find spots that inspired them, and he would do some drawings and start to put it together. Then he'd start sending them to Milne, and Milne just fell in love with his work. Yeah. And it really was important for Milne that it captured what was in Milne's head, and Shepard did that beautifully. And he also, now when you look back nearly 100 years, he captured the forest beautifully. Yeah. You know, it's the Ashdown Forest is actually more low-lying heathland, so it's really a heath rather than a forest. Yeah. And I believe the change in name dates back to Henry VIII. He used to use it as his own hunting lodge. Okay. And I think his ego said he had Hampstead Heath, he didn't need another heath, so it became a forest.
Was he local then?
Well, his Henry VIII obviously would have had a few places in London, but he used to come down here. He was courting a lady called Anne Boleyn at the time, and Anne actually had a place local to us in Hever. Sadly, Anne was one of the ones that was beheaded. Yeah. But the ultimate thing is he would pop down to see her and then come up to the forest to hunt boar. Okay. So there we go. There's a little bit of history lesson thrown in beyond Milne.
And earlier you were talking about Pooh's red jumper.
The odd thing about Winnie the Pooh's jumper, which is quite fascinating, is the fact that everybody assumes there's probably some lovely romantic story about the fact that Winnie the Pooh got cold one day and put on a jumper, never took it off. Yeah. But in reality, the truth is that a American called Stephen Schlechinger took the rights to produce some very, very early toys, and he created in the 1930s. He created the first Winnie the Pooh board game. He actually made Winnie the Pooh popular before Disney did. Yeah. So it's one of those things everybody assumes it was Disney, but actually credit should go to Stephen Schlechinger. He really had the ability to take a brand even that far back and do something with it. But what he did, he actually was getting some teddy bears made, and we have a whole set of them here from about the 1940s. And what he wanted to do essentially was to make sure that he could walk into any toy shop in any city in America and see that he was making money there.
Yeah.
So for him, it was a purely financial decision to put the red top on Winnie the Pooh, because that means he could walk in, see where the red tops were, know that he had his toys in there. If he didn't see the red top, he knew he didn't have his toys in there, and then he would walk out.
Yeah.
So it was just about that for him. It was purely financial. So we have upset a few people that really wanted some lovely, lovely story about the romanticism of the red top, but it just doesn't.
It's an interesting story, though.
Yeah, it is, and Disney kept it, and rightfully so, because I think it just gives, I think it does give Pooh just another characteristic that's worthy of falling in love with.
So we've gone through all the past and everything like that. Can we talk a bit about Disney acquiring it and the 2000s, when there was quite a few films? There was the Tigger movie, there was Piglet's Big movie, there was the Heffalump movie, there was a Halloween Heffalump movie. There was so much in the 2000s.
You know your movies.
Yeah.
Very impressive. There's nothing bad to say. I think it's exciting that, the reality is that a small business like us only survived because someone like Disney likes the product and cares about it and moves it forward. And we get to do what we do because the fans that then follow that, and we're humbled by it. There's nothing more incredible than I always tell the story about the lady that literally jumped on a plane from Ohio, changed at New York, landed at Gatwick Airport, got into a taxi straight from there, and came here. And she was exhausted, but her dream was to come to the forest, and nothing was stopping her that day. And we got to play part of the experience with her, and that's because of her love of growing up, watching the movies, and engaging with her family that way. Her and her mum would sit and read the books, or they'd watch the movies, and it's lovely to see that. So I think that fingers crossed as we head towards the. Disney have got its 100th anniversary this year, and they've got the touring show, and we've been to see it at XL in London, and it's a wonderful piece. They've got a lovely little Winnie the Pooh display there, and there's just to see an original cell animation, and then to see one of the bears from the Disney's Christopher Robin movie on display. For somebody that really cares and somebody that loves it, and then all the other wonderful Disney stuff they've got there as well. It's a beautiful display. So it's lovely to see that Disney, they could have put that all together and not included Winnie the Pooh. But I think it's a really important part of their agenda for the future, and I really hope it is. We're super proud to play our small part in the bigger picture. But our job is to look back, and our job is to, they look forward and they can create wonderful stuff, and we'll always support it. Our job is to remind people that actually A.A. Milne and Christopher Robin and E.H. Shepard and Daphne Milne and all these bit part players that are in it, they all played a part that allowed it to be successful, that led to Disney wanting it. And I think what's really special about Winnie the Pooh is when you think about the times and Walt Disney, he was just there probably wasn't a child in the world that didn't know about Mickey Mouse. He had everything he ever really needed. But the truth is, he bought, and it's the only thing that we're aware that he personally ever bought, was the rights to Winnie the Pooh, because he knew how important it was to his children. And I love that. That suggests that he did it from such a pure place, and that's really special. That's really special.
But unfortunately, Winnie the Pooh, part of it's now in the public domain, isn't it?
Only in America. So essentially, the way it works is that in America they have different laws and rights, and that means that there's certain parts of the text that have now fallen out into the public domain. Hence, you've had some films that are related to
They're
it.
a bit strange.
Bit strange, yeah. I'll let them research that of their own accord. The reality is that as we progress further and further on, yes, parts of the text of all writers drops into the public domain, and but I think what we've also learnt is people like George Lucas has showed that you can allow things to go into the public domain. He allowed people to write about Star Wars almost from the outset, and it didn't do Star Wars as a brand any harm whatsoever, even to the point where it was still attractive enough for Disney to buy it. So I think there's a lot to be said where nobody should ever be afraid about the public domain, and I hope people aren't in relation to when the books arrive in the public domain, because there's always new content to write. And you've got Jane and the team of publishers in the UK at Farshawe that basically write some amazing news stories. Jane O'Riordan does some amazing news stories of Winnie the Pooh, and it's lovely to know that she's so passionate about it herself.
There was one out recently, wasn't there?
Yes, there was, and it's a beautiful piece. And the exciting thing is that Winnie the Pooh is still present and active in the publishing world. You've got Jane and the team at Farshawe that release Winnie the Pooh books, and they're beautiful. She did the first one she did about 2 years ago now. Once There Was a Bear is a lovely, lovely set of stories about Winnie the Pooh before he was Winnie the Pooh. Yeah. And it talks about Harrods and talks about all sorts of things. And then you've got this new set, Tales of the Forest, which is a wonderful book that's just come out recently, which, again, people are loving it, absolutely loving it. So she has really caught the ability to champion these stories and move them forward.
And how did she get the rights to write about Winnie the Pooh?
So Farshawe basically worked with Jane to create these wonderful stories. They're illustrated by another huge talent called Mark Burgess, who really captures the visuals well. And it just creates this wonderful set of new stories. And to know that these things are still being written, and they are of value. They're not just stories for story's sake. They really are lovely pieces, because I do believe that the Milne and Shepherd Trust still require that if anything's going to happen with the stories, that they at least keep a sort of theme as to how they feel Milne and Shepherd would have done it, and what Farshawe do as a publisher is amazing.
What do you think the future holds? Firstly, I want to ask two ways. So firstly, for Winnie the Pooh as a brand. Secondly, for Pooh Corner itself. And firstly, we haven't had a Winnie the Pooh feature film since 2011 that's been like 2D animated. Do you think there will be a time when we'll have some more?
It'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just for us here, but actually it would. At the moment, there seems to be a focus because of streaming and various other bits and pieces. There is actually a really great children's animated series that Disney are doing. But it would be lovely to see some kind of feature-length piece, which would be really special. And I think there's lots of scope for it. I don't think it needs to be, there's still a lot of untold stories, and there's a lot of things that could be done with it, which I think would be lovely.
Yeah.
But again, there's nothing wrong with the real-life characterization aspects. I think the way that technology allowed Disney to do the characters in Disney's Christopher Robin, I think that leads to a whole exciting world that you can create. And I don't think we should be afraid of the technology. I think what we should be afraid of is the fact that there is almost too much. I'd rather the quality was there than quantity. And I think I'll give everybody credit for that, because even in the books and everything, that there is really good quality. And that's something that we would always support.
So have you ever talked to Jim Cummings, the voice of Winnie the Pooh?
No, but he does follow us on Instagram.
Okay.
So we will at some point, I'm sure, have a chat with Jim. We've met a number of people that have been involved in Winnie the Pooh over the years, and it's an absolute joy. It's one of those things where the passion that people have for Winnie the Pooh is enormous. We are very lucky to live in a beautiful part of the world which has a lot of potential for, we have Oscar winners next to us, and we've got people on the forest that are famous musicians. We've got all sorts of creative talent in the area, and what that means for us is that they're aware of the stories of Winnie the Pooh, and they help the forest via environmental issues, and they do all sorts of things. So our aim really is, if I look at what we're trying to do here, is to make sure that we can preserve the area and keep it as environmentally sound as possible. Because it'd be lovely to know that the work that we're doing today means that children in the next 100 years still have a Pooh Bridge to go to, or they've still got an enchanted place to go to. Yeah. Because actually, all these things, even a forest takes money to survive. Yeah. And part of our job is to make sure that the people that visit learn about the ecology and the animals and the things that actually the forests do to conserve and do some amazing work. So our job here at Pooh Corner is to make sure that we really can help educate on a number of levels. We want to tell people about the past. We want to make sure people understand that Winnie the Pooh was a million little accidents that just happened along the way. From a man from Birmingham moving to Toronto to train to be a vet, then going to Winnipeg, then the First World War breaking out. Then he finds that he's buying a little black bear cub in the middle of Canada, and that black bear cub gets called Winnipeg because that's where they're from. Cut a long story short, that bear ends up at the London Zoo and is called Winnie, and that's where Christopher Robin changes the name of his teddy bear.
Okay.
From Edward to Winnie. And these are the amazing things where there's a million little accidents that happened along the way that I could bore everybody with for hours, but I won't. But it is one of those things for the journey ahead on the films and other things. I'm sure there's stuff that will happen.
Yeah.
And thankfully, what has gone in the past is so good that people still travel from all over the world to experience a game of Pooh sticks, and then come in here for a cup of tea and a walk around the museum and the gift shop.
Do you plan to expand the museum? Is there anything you've got now that you'd like to put it in the future?
We've got plenty. We're always looking at ways that we could develop the museum. It's small but loved at the moment.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we've got enough to treble or quadruple the size of things that we have in our archives.
So what would you like that you've got in your archives to be in the museum?
We've got some amazing letters from A.A. Milne.
Yeah.
Some of them where he's written about Christopher, and they're beautiful to read. Okay. Although Milne's handwriting is atrocious by standards. So we'd have to put a print beside it. But just to know that there's always an assumption that Christopher Robin was angry at his father because of everything. There was a beautiful bond between them, and it's a bit of a myth that they were angry. Christopher's frustration with it was really more to do with the fact that he didn't get an option. It just happened without him. But actually, when you read how A. Milne talks about his son in the letters we've got, it's beautiful. Yeah. And it shows that a father really did love his son. Yeah. And actually that's special because, nowadays in this modern world, we all get the text saying that, this, that and the other. They won't be able to be shown not in the same way. No. Not from the hand, which really shows the emotion of the man.
Yeah, exactly.
And how he talks about his child and his wife and all those things. So it's beautiful to have things like that. And we've just put on display an individual portrait that was done by Christopher done for Christopher and his mother, that's on display in the museum, and lots of other bits that we're super proud of. Yeah. But we're always looking for new bits and pieces, and we travel the world searching for stuff. The aim of Pooh Corner isn't for it to make me any money. What it does is every penny it makes goes to ensuring that we can fill up the museum for the future generations. I'm super lucky to be in that position, and I'm even more lucky to be able to be the owner of Pooh Corner because it's a beautiful experience.
And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
It's been a pleasure.
So I hope to talk to you again soon as well. That would be nice.
Amazing.
Yeah.